Welcome to Psychology the Daf. We are in Gemara Pesachim Daf Samach Daled. Sometimes we're in situations where the cost of publicly standing by our beliefs and defending what we know to be true is great. What does it take to be steadfast and consistent in your beliefs despite all social pressures? Who in Jewish history can we draw strength as role models? Our Gemara in Amud Beis describes a remarkable story. Actually, the Gemara alludes to it. The full extent of the story can be found in Mishnah Edius Perik Hey, Mishnayos Vav and Zayin. And in this remarkable story, this Tana, Akavia ben Mahalalel, does the following. First of all, it begins with a dispute between the Chachamim and Akavia over four matters. One matter of the dispute was that he held that a convert, a Gioris, cannot be subjected to the Sota ordeal, the Sota test of drinking the bitter waters in order to determine whether or not she committed adultery. And he says that he learned that and got that as a tradition from his Rebbes, from his masters, Shmaya and Avtalion. Now, the Mishnah records that the Chachamim asked Akavia to retract his position, which is more likely, and you can see this according to some commentaries, more likely they asked him to publicly agree that the practice should be in accordance with the sages who had an alternate tradition. The sages had a tradition that a convert can indeed drink from the waters of the Sota, and they tell Akavia, if you will retract, we will appoint you as head of the National Bezdin. Akavia says his well-known and famous words to this, Mutav she ekare shota kol yomai va'al yihya rosh hashach lefnei hamakom. It is better for me to be seen as a fool my entire life than to be wicked in the eyes of the omnipresent, even for but a moment. Meaning, Akavia was saying that if I were to retract, even simply to allow the practice to be in accordance with the sages, not necessarily even to retract my intellectual opinion, it would appear as if I was motivated by the bribe of becoming the head of the National Bezdin, and therefore he refuses. Now, the story goes on. This remarkable story continues in the following manner. The sages, to refute Akavia's testimony that this is what he learned from Shmaya and Avtalion, say that there's a well-known historical incident where Shmaya and Avtalion actually gave a Gioris, actually was a converted Shifcha, because the Shifcha, once she leaves servitude, she automatically becomes Jewish. In any case, whatever the case may be, she had the din of a Gioris, and the Shmaya and Avtalion had her drink from the waters of the Sota. And here, Akavia responds in a way that's hard to fully interpret correctly. There's two basic readings. He says, Dimua Hishkuha, which you could read as Shmaya and Avtalion had her drink a fake ersatz water of Sota, and they were just trying to scare her so that she would confess. That's one possible interpretation. The other one, which is even more radical, is Akavia was suggesting that since Shmaya and Avtalion, who were either Gerim or they descended from Gerim, as we see from the Gemara Gittin on the Zayin of Beis, that they had sympathy toward the Gioris and didn't want her to feel any more worthy than any other Jewess, and didn't want to cut her off from the process, or they themselves felt that as Gerim, they didn't want Gerim to be seen as any less. Whatever the case may be, Akavia was suggesting that one of those two things took place, but in actuality, there was no real obligation and no real ability to have a convert use the waters of the Sota. Now, what happened then, and this is what our Gemara quotes, what happened then was the sages, according to one account, put Akavia in Cherem for being disrespectful, because such a way of viewing Shmaya and Avtalion's actions would be considered highly disrespectful, especially if you go according to the second view. Even the first view is problematic, but the second view is even more problematic, that somehow or another they were nogea b'davar because they were gerim, and therefore they did something different. That's highly problematic. Then the Mishnah says, no, chas v'shalom, never could be. It must be an incorrect historical account that Akavia ever was put in cherem, because such a great sage like him, there was no one greater than he. When the doors of the Azara closed at the brinking of the Korban Pesach, which meant that you had the majority of Jews in the Beis Hamikdash at that time, there was none greater in Yerushalayim. Here too, there's an interesting machlokas how to interpret, and you can look in the Tosfos Yom Tov to see more details. Either they were saying it never happened, because how could Akavi have done such a thing? He was such a great Yerushalayim person. He had such fear of heaven, he never would say such a thing about Shemaiah and Avtalion. Or, more interestingly, some learn that no, indeed, Akavi ben Mahalal did say that in a moment of frustration or whatever it was, in order to refute the account that the sages were throwing at him to deny his tradition that he had from Shemaiah and Avtalion. Perhaps I could add parenthetically that maybe that's why he felt it still was derech eretz, because he was maintaining their tradition. I don't know, but whatever the case may be, he actually did that thing. But they're saying chas v'sholom, they would put somebody like that of such great stature in cherem. And we find, for example, earlier in the Masechet Pesachim on Daf Nun Gimel Amud Aleph, we find someone who's of far less stature than Akavi ben Mahalal, Todos Ish Romi, and they wouldn't put him in cherem because of his stature. So there is some idea here to support the notion that Akavi ben Mahalal did the wrong thing, but it still didn't merit him being put in cherem because of his stature. Now, one final part of the story involves Akavi and his son. When Akavia was on his deathbed, he instructed his son to now follow the position of the sages, not his position. And his rationale is that since I heard what I heard straight from Shemaiah and Avtalion, therefore I do not need to submit myself to the tradition of the sages, even though they're the majority, because I heard it from Shemaiah and Avtalion. They also represent not a minority opinion, and not only that, I heard it with my own 2 ears, as it were. So, but on the other hand, Akavi is telling his son, you can follow the tradition of the sages. They are the majority. And not that, by the way, the commentary is saying not that he is required to do that, but he can do that. And his son says, okay, but he says, would you put in a good word for me with the sages? By the way, this shows that there is some credence to the notion that Akavia was put in cherem, or at least deserved to be put in cherem, because it implies that there was a falling out between Akavia and the sages, and that's why when his son would return back to their caucus, as it were, to become part of their group, he needed his father to extend an olive branch. He was asking his father to put in a good word so that they would then reconcile with at least Akavia's son. And to this, Akavi says, no, I will not do this. So his son asked him, why will you not do this for me? Have you seen anything defective about me? And Akavi says, no, that's not the problem. He says, I do not want to interpose between you and the sages, because your deeds alone will bring you closer to the sages, and your deeds alone will push you further from them. Now, what I want to remark about over here is Akavia's integrity and self-consistency. On the one hand, he refuses to concede to the sages at all costs. On the other hand, he counsels his son to follow the sages. So it takes great humility to be so strong and at the same time so conciliatory. Not only that, but he doesn't even want to commit nepotism and give his son an advantage. Instead, he counsels his son, your successes and your failures, socially, spiritually, whatever the case may be with these chachamim, is due to your deeds and your deeds alone. Now, perhaps we can say that this thread of courage and incorruptible personality stems from the famous principle quoted in Akavi ben Mahalal in Pirkei Avos, Perek Gimel Mishnah Aleph, where he says that one should know 3 things and you'll never come to sin. Where do you come from? Where are you going? And before whom you are destined to give an account and reckoning. Right? Where do you come from? You're nothing but small cellular matter that doesn't amount to anything. Where are you going to go? The end is you'll end up in the dust, and you'll be eaten up by the worms and the bugs and whatever else. And who are you destined to stand before and give an accounting? Before the Melech Mechayim Lachem HaKadosh Baruch Hu.